The Valley Current.
Hey, Yon, you're there.
Yeah.
Hey, you're looking good, man. Did you get dressed up?
No. No, I didn't do anything different.
I like it. You got the Christmas cards in the background. It's great. Seriously.
Yeah.
So listen, I want to spend a few minutes talking about DeepSeek. I always think of it as Deep 6 whenever I think of their names, because they kind of were trying to Deep 6 the OpenAI ChatGPT tool. And you are my resident expert on Deep 6 because you've done something that DeepSeek, because you've done something that most people don't do, which is you actually told me you've re-outfitted a computer that you had in the garage or something, and you downloaded with permission, because they made all their stuff available, the entire DeepSeek LLM, large language model, and have deployed it in a very secure way, right? It's
actually sitting right there on the ground.
I know, it's kind of like a
big
cable. That's a big, what used to be called a big white box, but in a black box, right?
In anticipation for this call, I looked up, why I purchased it. Originally, I bought this so, Minhee, my youngest, she was studying chemistry at the time.
Right.
And it turned out that
she's brilliant. She's brilliant, by the way. We would offer her a job in a nanosecond. She's going to be probably first in her class in law school if she decides to go to law school.
It's funny you say that. She's graduating this June, and it looks like she's on pace to graduate Phi Beta Kappa and
she's amazing.
Magna Cum Laude.
Yeah, she's amazing.
Anyway, back then, this box, we got it actually for virtual reality.
Mm-hmm.
She was studying chemistry, and I was trying to tell her that conformation or shape of molecules drove the properties. And they had a tool that you can actually render a molecule in virtual reality and be able to turn it around and play with it.
Right. Right.
So she had a lot of fun with that. And, give you one example. It turns out that the chemical composition of the material that crustaceans are made of, that hard shell.
Right.
Atom-wise is made up of entirely almost identical composition to starch.
Really?
But a mere different bond and different shape renders it so hard compared to, the stuff that we eat and so forth. So I remember this because we brought up both molecules, and she was able to clearly see the different shapes,
So you were using the machine as a visualization tool?
Yes, sir.
Right.
So at that time, VR was just getting into the educational realm, and future surgeons were figuring out, where the internal organs and, more importantly, the spatial relationship, like, how closely maybe like a pulmonary artery is the rest of the, cavity and so forth. So right. I thought it was a fun thing. And then once it served its duty, it had become my son's gaming machine.
Right, because you got some GPUs in that machine, right?
I have two 1080 Ti. It's a 7-year-old machine.
Right.
And then, after it left, it became my AI hardware, so.
Were you doing cryptocurrency mining on it too, or that?
Not really. Okay. I did at one time do some work for a security company that was interested in, adding additional security for wallets involved with cryptos, right? So they had various blockchains, and the idea was to secure it.
Right.
So I'm familiar with that space as well.
So you dig the machine out and you say, hey, there's like millions of dollars of software here that are being gifted to the world by DeepSeek, by the Chinese, and they've done it on a much lower budget than what OpenAI or any of these other players, Anthropic, there's a bunch of them that have all come out with these new AI tools that are making their way. I can tell you, it's just like a wildfire, the number of lawyers that are talking about what the effect is on the law practice. And recently I heard a judge say, oh yeah, we're starting to use it in our own evaluation of case briefs. There's a judge that does settlement. They don't even read the settlement briefs anymore. They push the settlement briefs into the ChatGPT summary instruction. They say, summarize it. So instead of reading the 25 pages on each side, they're getting like a 2-page summary of what do the parties' briefs say. And, of course, the parties think, oh, my lawyer's done a great job with 25 pages on each side telling the story. And the settlement judge might just be reading the summary. Hopefully ChatGPT is doing a good job on the summary. But you were concerned about making sure that the information stays secure. So you don't want it to have a connection to the internet, right?
It's not so much the connection to the internet or not, right? But we all know, from books that we see being published, just exactly some of the prompt that we're entering to Google, right, when we search and so forth. And it's one thing when you try to extract information from the internet at large, the way we do when we search for Google. But here, I think is a paradigm shift because, like the exercise I went through this morning, and like the judge you mentioned, you're actually submitting your own data. You're not just trying to extract it. You're just basically saying, based on this very personal and maybe secure information, why don't I send this to you? Which then at that point, the instant now becomes property of, fill in the blank, OpenAI,
right,
Perplexity, whomever.
Right.
And we live in the world where now the monetization of data is so pervasive, right? And it wasn't so much the cost, but more to the fact that I wanted to, just more of like a self-study more than anything else to see, is this truly closed? So as you mentioned, OpenAI didn't share this out of the goodness of their own heart. You can make the argument that maybe OpenAI should follow or other people, but they basically benefited, from all the things that had come before.
Right.
And especially more the advances that they're able to give this huge quantum leap are based on other models. So it's like a chicken and egg problem. They couldn't have created these advances in complete vacuum.
Right.
And he actually was like a paradigm shift even in his own country. Just 12 shy months before then, the head of, I believe, Baidu had said that, maybe we should concentrate on creating AI-driven applications rather than the actual foundation model themselves. And this gentleman, he was he made his fortune being a quant. Mm-hmm. And then he basically decided to go out and buy as many of the first-class GPUs that he could afford before the barriers came down. Mm-hmm. And in fact, the Chinese authorities asked, before we even knew what LLMs were back in 2021, why are you purchasing 10,000 of these things when, one of them costs 40,000 a piece or whatever it was going back then.
These are all the sales that NVIDIA made that made it so valuable, right?
Yeah. So, but he had an idea, he had a thought. And if you look at all the progress that DeepSeek were able to make, some of them are truly novel, like what they mention as the multi-head latent attention. And I can go into some of these details. And some of them were just more like manually intensive, right? The part he did with supervised fine-tuning and so forth. And what is absolutely certain is that this gentleman with his cohorts essentially left no stone unturned. He was going to try to optimize it on every front, not only in the training process, but in the post-processing and everything else, right? And when it made sense, he even ran with like a really, really, really low level assembly level optimizations if he thought he was justifying the effort. So, he really was novel in that sense, even among his own countrymen.
Is this the guy that's named Liang Wenfeng, Liang Wenfeng, Wenfeng?
Yeah, he's kind of like I can't remember. He's only 39 years old. So just recently, when he was brought forth to, in front of like the premier and the president of PRC, he was the only guy that still had black hair. Like all the
Right.
other
Right.
people on that same table were, great hair gentlemen from likes of Tencent, Baidu, Alibaba, and so forth. He himself, even among his own, countrymen and contemporaries, did something very, very revolutionary, which was instead of sitting on the laurels and trying to figure out how do I monetize whatever gains that's being published, he decided that, I made a little. I'm not going to be lost for funds. And he decided to invest in people where he set up shop in Beijing. I heard within walking distance to Tsinghua and Peking University, and basically, paid twice the going rate for AI PhDs, and he built this thing out. So
Right.
he's a risk taker. He's very innovative, and
Yeah,
now we see the end results.
he started a venture fund, a hedge fund called High Flyer,
That's the one.
right? And
That's
High
the one.
Flyer
So
technically owns or co-owns DeepSeek, which is
Yep.
a portfolio company, and he's the co-founder of High Flyer, and he also serves as CEO of both
That's
High
right.
Flyer as
That's
well
right.
as DeepSeek.
Yeah, so he worked for I think like a couple of years, and then he decided to, as you said, become a quant at a hedge fund, and then he made his billions, and then he decided to then reinvest that, towards something truly novel.
And he released this under what's called the MIT open source license. You're a graduate
Yes, sir.
of
Yes, sir.
MIT, right? So there you go. So you kind of understand that you can have access to all of what he's produced, but it takes more than just downloading it to get it to work, right? Don't you have to do a bunch of other stuff on the machine itself?
No,
to get it to
in
work?
all fairness, I think I can't take too much credit for it. I think we're at a very interesting point in history where, very much the way the net was open, right? Like to this day, you can go to any website and look at you can view the source page and so forth.
Right.
At least the AI, and a lot of credit goes to the godfathers of AI, Jeffrey Hinton, Joshua Bengio, and so forth. They created a culture where it was not only very competitive but highly collaborative, where one progress led to another, and they went to great length to share these things. So there definitely is a custom, and if I did any work, it was in the basically putting it together, the integration parts. But
Right.
the building blocks, many, many, many hands went into contributing in.
Right. But I mean, there are a number of steps where you have to get other stuff
Sure.
in the machine, right?
That goes without saying, right?
Right.
The idea is to take many disparate pieces and make it all reside within one physical box, right? So the idea is that.
And you did that within like a 20-hour period or 15?
No, that's not a true reflection, right? Like I have decades long working on this, first applying AI to media and film content.
Okay.
And then I worked several years where we did what's known as a named entity retrieval, which is if you feed me any kind of like a business documentation, then you can just basically interact with a AI model to extract any kind of piece of information you wanted out of that document.
Okay.
Right? So if it took me a little bit less time than other people's because, I've been steeped in it for a little bit.
Right. But the idea, I mean, this was just released in January and we're in March now, right? The DeepSeek stuff came available, I think, in January. The business has been around for maybe a couple of years, but basically they made the decision, which had a big impact with people thinking, wow, how did this get done so fast and on such a low budget? But you were able to get it as probably many people around the world got it and can get it today. And I did send you a paper from a gentleman that's presented at Stanford, about trying to get it to work on a Raspberry Pi. I think he calls it an Orange Pi, which is a really small processor, right? To get this all to work on. Your machine is like 1,000,000 times more sophisticated than that.
So I don't know if you saw the example that he gave, but his just is more like a proof of concept to show that if you make the model small enough,
right,
something as small as a Raspberry can run it.
Right.
And here's the catch-all. It's not the fact that you absolutely must have a GPU. In fact, there have been some attempts on the internet to build out a server with nothing other than banks of RAM and with just, rudimentary ARM-based CPUs. They can run the, 405 Llama model, but the output is really slow. It's, I think, maybe like a 1/5 of a token every second. So it's very, very, very slow. So in a slide, you can't really tell what's happening, right? So here, I sometimes get a little bit frustrated. So whenever I've been using it to kind of help me code, I'm in a process of trying to do a startup that requires Rust. I'm just trying to learn the language as I go. And I'll be the first to admit that it can't generate industry-grade code. But it's a great starter, right? If you have a notion, you'll spit out some code that not always, but with minor tweaks will compile. And then as you go on, you can kind of use it. So, it's the equivalent of, lots of interns that I don't actually have to pay.
Right. I mean, OpenAI announced, I think yesterday or maybe the day before, that they're going to have agents, and some of them are going to cost like $20,000 a month.
That's the going rate. Like lots of people now think that's the next step, right? Which is, this notion of agent that you mentioned, which is interacting with a AI model to be able to handle tasks. And, I see that number around, 15 to 20,000 a year. And that number always hovers around the equivalent of, maybe $2 or $2.50 an hour.
Right.
That's where that figure comes around.
Right.
But the idea is that, I saw one of those things run, and I have mentioned that there's still not very robust. The task was to figure out how to roll out a Kubernetes cluster and to stop and not actually execute the order, but somehow it had blown right by that stage, and it had turned on 20 instances, whatever the. So I think
it had a credit card. It had a credit card number to actually get something.
It did, and this is where I think that's going to be the next interesting stage, where if it has possession of your PII, right, the information that describes who you are and other financial things associated, like a credit card,
right,
I think it's going to be a while before you can just trust explicitly, right?
Right.
Because what's to kind of prevent, and the notion of like an idea and the notion of work that should be kind of like cultured and curated, I think it's going to be ever more precious, right? In a day where these things can spit these things out without really understanding the value. You can't evaluate the worth of one output versus another, right? You still need a human element. And in such a world, how are you going to protect your idea that you don't necessarily want to share?
But you are impressed, it sounds like, generally with what DeepSeek has done.
Well, I don't know if I'm impressed, but I can show you a couple examples if I can share the screen.
Yeah, go for it. It should be available.
Yeah, so I was playing around with this just for this demo. This conversation we're having.
Right.
So let's see. So
you're on that big black machine now, right? That GPU box, right?
So I tried to see if we can basically explain how do you go from the first equation to the second equation. And this is part of algorithm known as a KL divergence. And basically, it's used to compare the similarity between two probability distribution.
Okay.
And
that was just pulled out of a statistics book. That little
it's just, it's a commonly known, like people who are in AI space know KL divergence intimately well, because we constantly have to figure out if we have a probability distribution, how similar is it?
Right.
So I'm just showing you an example of like a Rust code that I asked to write. I basically ask, create a program that can make use of a package known as Rush SSH. And then it kind of, does its little thinking. This is known as chain of thought. And it'll create a code which
even the chain of thought is kind of impressive, right?
It really is.
It shows you the way it's breaking it down.
Yeah, this code didn't work, but I was able to make enough changes to make it run. So this is the two equations that I just mentioned, right? I just wrote it out. And then I was just blown away. It just literally starts cranking away, figures out the various pieces, the Lagrangian, the derivatives. And then it came up with the right answer, So this is on a machine that's 7 years old, right? It took 4 minutes, but right now what I'm really concerned is privacy, make sure it doesn't go out to the internet at large.
Right. So,
and then,
so let's just reiterate that point. From a security point of view, you're confident and you've assured, even though the machine is plugged into the internet, that everything that you do is locally on the machine itself. Because I can tell you, law firms are very worried about their associates, and some of them are barring the associates from using any LLM, any AI tool at all, because they worry that there will be a security breach or a privacy breach or confidentiality breach that will sink the law firm in litigation or otherwise with the client, right?
I ran monitors to make sure that nothing was being sent back.
Right.
And I can't say with absolute certainty that future releases, they won't, seed something, with a backdoor. I can't guarantee that. But just to prove the point that you said, I ran it with the network cable pulled out.
Right.
I just can't do it now because if I were to pull out the network cable, this session would go away.
Right.
But the idea is that, even without it, with no access, it just runs. Right. And, some of the licenses that you had mentioned, for example, the MIT license, it's basically saying that unless you're making money from this, you can just use it however you see fit.
Right. So conceptually, if I'm a law firm CEO and there are some really big law firms that would be really interested in this, to be able to have essentially on every associate's desk a souped up PC. I don't know what the going price is, but I can tell you it's probably not more than a few $1,000s.
It's just about $10,000.
Yeah. So
right now, the biggest problem is the lag in the parts. Right. It was introduced like in consumer electronics, which is first week in January. And I looked up the delivery times and it's not till end of this month, So we were still 3 months lag. And these things can be set up where, it doesn't even have to be one per. Many people can share it.
Right.
Somebody like me can configure it and mail it to you. And all you have to do is just plug it in. So
if I'm the law firm CEO or CFO or both, I think to myself, if I can have one of these boxes in each associate's office or maybe share between two associates, and I'm sure that they're not going to be able to release anything because it's all localized, and they're yet able to use essentially the same kind of ChatGPT interface, which is just conversational, to be able to spark writing or coding or whatever else the knowledge worker is doing. That's a major interest on the part of these firms, because I tell you, they're really worried that they're going to get tagged for information that gets released into the blogosphere, as it were, and then they're caught in this loop with the client saying you were, and the bar, because the bar is strict about confidentiality, that you didn't take steps. So I always wonder, like, if the price comes down over time, and usually it does, on the ability of these machines to be very local and secure, then everyone's going to go in the direction of, I just want the local and secure thing, because I don't want to keep feeding the monster of information that OpenAI and Claude and Perplexity and the 7 other ones that are out there. They just go with the sort of DeepSeek version or whatever most emulates it, because I'm sure there'll be other players that do the same thing that DeepSeek does, right? At some point.
So it's important to kind of compare apples to apples. Mm-hmm. Just like we started this call by you alluding to models that can run on Raspberry Pi, it may run, but it's not going to be very useful to you, right? Mm-hmm. So it's not fair to compare the 32 billion parameter model that I'm running on this machine against the full-blown version, which I think it's north of 600 billion. So you won't be able to run that, but you can run something better. There's another intermediate version that's running that has 70 billion parameters. And the question that you need to answer for yourself is, I mean, for me, I'm repurposing a machine that I paid, between $3,000 to $4,000 7 years ago. Mm-hmm. And the only thing that's costing me is electricity that I'm already paying for,
right, and
my internet connection.
Right.
So, let's say not 10,000, but like if you have to spend 20,000 and $2 an hour for a year is just shy of, it's a little more than I think 15,000, right?
Right.
So you'd actually have your own hardware after the first year.
Right.
But is that model going to be good enough, whatever you're trying to do? Because it's the result that you want to, base your decision on.
Right.
If the ability of the detail and the ability of granularity in the results that you're seeing suffices your needs,
You would say right now it's really proved to you that you have.
Well, I'm not doing anything really fancy. I have a relatively accurate expectation what I hope to get out of this. I'm not basically going to, tell this guy write an application for me. You probably can't do that. And the key thing to bear in mind, two other information, is that you need to be able to have a means to kind of update, right? Like, so this thing was released a couple of months ago.
Right.
And all the information that it has is just frozen in that time. Right. And the ability to kind of expand more knowledge in any one realm. So those are two things, like, being able to be fed and updated with new information, or become a better guru in any one area. You can have algorithmic work done to it to enhance any model, right? So these are the additional steps that you don't get with, just open source and hardware off the shelf. But having said that, you got to be okay with your expectation of what you want out of it versus what you actually can deliver has to match. And not knowing anything about law and not actually having used it, I can't comment on that. But one thing I can show you, like a sample summary. Mm-hmm. So I was looking up the actual paper that allowed me to think about getting this thing for my daughter in the first place. Mm-hmm. It was an article around that year, and it talked about how molecular conformations, virtual reality can enhance the study of this. And, the selling point for me was this little diagram where you can have this thing running in your living room, and you can actually envision, what the molecule looks like. Here, and the thing below, they're looking at, I think, the buckyball, the carbon-60.
Right, right.
So, I fed this to my DeepSeek, and sure enough, it summarized perfectly. It talked about how different shapes are driven by the constitution of the molecules, and how shapes drive properties and its ability to interact with other molecules and so forth. And same thing, with the slide presentation you sent to me. You actually thought through very concretely, and he gave very reasonable summary. So you can kind of interact with it and then see whether it's adequate to your needs. But I think that's the main criterion before you need to make a decision whether this is something of interest to you or not.
Right. Wouldn't there be people that would commission a comparison to say, okay, here's the chat text, that the prompt that I put into OpenAI, same prompt is put into Claude, same prompt is put into 6 others, whatever the number is. There's a whole group of them. We've actually done some of these comparisons ourselves, and it's a generic question that's of some useful value. And then you take that same exact prompt and you give it to your, what I'm calling your closed system, right? Because the system is basically not connected to the internet. And you say to it, take all this data and let's see what you do with it, and then compare what the output is. What do you think?
Right now,
happen?
this
What do you think would
comparison is the most interesting and challenging part. Everybody wants to be top of their leaderboard, right? But it has to be impartial. It has to be relatively universally applicable, right? You're not just trying to run up the numbers,
right?
And like everything else, once you assign a number, you just get fixated on that metric, and sometimes the essence kind of gets lost. But this is the leaderboard that DeepSeek released. So the leftmost one is the mathematical set of questions. The other one is being able to write code and so forth. And MMLU is the most commonly used criterion. And just to compare, even MMLU, let's say that's the most commonly used one. So OpenAI O1, this is a closed system and it's quite expensive. And the DeepSeek R1 that was released in January, I think this one has maybe less than half the number of parameters that OpenAI is using. We don't know because OpenAI won't publish the results.
Right.
It's pretty darn close. It's significantly better, than some of the other ones that are available. So that measuring stick that you're talking about, right? I think what eventually is going to migrate toward is that there's going to be a measuring stick for law, measuring stick for medical usage. It can't be a universal single number that's excellent for everything. But whatever foundation model is used, I believe that as these things become more pervasive and become more esoteric to any given realm, that realm will have to come up with its own measuring stick.
Right. You understand my thought, which is just to see comparatively what did OpenAI do, what did Claude do, what did Perplexity do. Like, I would actually love to have a dashboard, like this is my idea of a future product, where you basically can put all these tools to work. So imagine you're paying the $20 a month for the pro version of Perplexity, the pro version of Claude, the pro version of ChatGPT, and then there's like 4 others, but just at least those 3. And you also have the local version. I'm calling it a local version of DeepSeek that's on your machine locally. And you're just trying to compare how do these things end up doing between the 3 sort of leading horses in the race and the one kind of Chinese horse that is actually local and secure. And I have to tell you, if you do enough testing, and you can do it randomly on a variety of different queries, and the results are substantially similar and as robust and as detailed, I would say the secure approach is definitely worth the value that's created in it being secure, because there is no secure version of any of those other tools, except someone told me recently Perplexity Pro put in a toggle that allows you to say everything will get killed after 24 hours. It's basically there's an incognito mode in Perplexity Pro that allows you to press a button that says, I want to go incognito, and it kills everything. It doesn't save anything after 24 hours. It's only useful for 24 hours.
I think they're trying to separate themselves with from Google. Now
Yeah.
that Google has put all their energy on
Gemini.
enhancing search with AI.
Right.
So, we'll see how true or how, how much of a difference maker that becomes. But back to what you're saying, all these numbers that people are going to compare, they'll always, put their biggest and baddest model.
Right.
So, if you were to actually just compare numerically in a generic numerical comparison like the MMLU, it might not truly reflect the capabilities of what you can run locally. So let's say, you say, well, it's going to cost me, over 15,000 a year just to run it. I'll spend 20 grand and run the second biggest model. It could be perfectly good for what you're trying to do.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason you won't know it is because the one little secret that nobody ever mentions is that these things cannot tell you things that have not been created. Mm-hmm. It is not an innovator. You can't create anything. All it's really doing is glorify sentence completion. So if it's been trained with things that share the same feature and the kind of law summary that you want to do, then you'll do dramatically better. It's no little secret that, originally OpenAI seemed to have an advantage because, at least when it came to code, because, Microsoft was not only a generous patron, but they could give them access to GitHub, because that was their entity. So whatever data space you have to train your model to begin with, it will learn from the features that are rich in that space. And then when it tries to actually do inference, and try to write code of its own, it will have understood the patterns and the rhythm and the grammar associated with a specific computer language. And then when you ask him to reproduce it, it'll be better than others,
Right. So I would love to do a comparison test. I don't think we can do it in real time, but it would be really interesting to see, like, what does it do? What would it do with really simple requests, simple comparative requests? Because to some degree, I do think that OpenAI and all these others go out to the internet and do get some real-time information that does change all the time. And you're not going to get that with DeepSeek because it only has what it has, right? It's not going to be able to get you the most updated information. For example, one thing lawyers do is they try to investigate who's the judge that was assigned to my case and give me a dossier of information about that judge. And it goes out and searches all the various places that mention the judge's name and tries to compile a dossier. And you could actually give pretty specific instructions about how you want the dossier of information organized. I would think DeepSeek would fail on that kind of dynamic search.
I conjecture that even Perplexity and OpenAI would fail equally well. So that kind of update that you're talking about, it all depends whether the latest and the newest information on this particular judge was part of the last training set,
right?
That's currently deployed. So there's been changes or enhancement you can call. So all these models have two approaches. One is known as a RAG, retrieval augmented generative, which basically means that rather than only based on your ability to extract information from the foundation model, I'm going to feed you some data in the form of a vector database that reflects some documentation that I want you to pay greater attention to.
Right.
Okay. And then the other enhancement is known as LoRa, low rank adapters, where I keep using this analogy, and I don't know if it's accurate, but adapters serve as like the last layer. So you don't actually tinker with the weights of the original model, but what you do is you put a hat on top, and that hat is rigged to be really good at your particular realm you're trying to work with. So, you can put a fireman's hat, a doctor's hat, a lawyer's hat. And the combination of RAG and LoRa have shown that, you can teach it to behave better or with greater enhancements. And these are things that require engineering know-how, and it's something that out of the box that even OpenAI couldn't do.
Right. So, ChatGPT's got actually the paid version has GPT 4.0, and then they have something called GPT 4.01, uses advanced reasoning, GPT 4.03, fast at advanced reasoning, GPT 4.03, mini high, great at coding and logic, and GPT, various flavors of GPT. Does DeepSeek have the same kind of flavor of the month kind of thing that ChatGPT has?
So the O1 that you're referring to, this is when the I don't know if you recall, but they gave it like every time they make an announcement, they give it some human attribute.
Right.
They were comparing to Scarlett Johansson's voice in Her, the movie Her.
Right.
But in fact, it was DeepSeek that released a paper that showed the step-by-step how to actually implement the chain of thought. And, they not only have them, but it looks like it's a matter of time to be able to reverse engineer enough of this stuff. And, not actually wanting to blow my budget on enriching OpenAI, I myself have not tried all these different things. But what I do know is I recently read that the advances in DeepSeek made both GCP and OpenAI lower their pricing. So, yeah, we'll see.
So can I give you, just to whet my appetite of doing something further, can I give you this prompt to put into DeepSeek?
Yeah, just type for me on the chat.
I'm going to type on the chat. This was something I did just to see what ChatGPT knows about me. I said, act as a detailed researcher, research the quality of work done by attorney and certified appellate specialist Jack Russo and his law firm named Computer Law Group. I may have misspelled Computer Law Group there. Yeah, of course I did. It's still fixed at LLP, and provide a summary in 10 numbered paragraphs.
So I want to tell you ahead of time that it's relatively slow. You got to
let's just see what it does. So you just grab that, right? You can grab that text, right? You can pop it in.
I did. Right? So I'm still sharing. You can see that I just cut and paste, right?
Yeah, I see it.
So I hit return.
Yeah, so let's see what it does.
And it's working away.
Right.
And I can bring up the window that's actually running that shows.
Yeah, it's an amazing thing, right? Because I can't imagine that it's got all the data about me that's on the internet compressed into the language model that you downloaded. I just can't even imagine that's.
But, I think that's the other thing that I think human beings are taking a new look at, what it means to have like an actual human construct.
Right.
I think we're getting new appreciation just how amazingly good language is at representation.
Right.
It's really, really great at compression,
Right.
I'll give you another example. There was a theoretical physicist who became a believer in this stuff when LLMs could differentiate the trajectory between a boson particle and a different subatomic particle.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not because LLMs ever trained or tested on, subatomic physics. It's just that the construct that we call mathematics and the way we represent numerical values, the way that these things progress only follows certain, different ones. And if two trajectories are sufficiently different, then it will be able to tell the difference. And it is a kind of a progressive algorithm, right? So
what is the purple window that you have open that has like the sine waves on it? What's
going
on? What is
this
that?
This is known as NV top, and it's basically showing the measurement of the activity of the two GPUs.
Okay.
So the yellow is the amount of memory that's being used. So as I mentioned, I have two, here it says right here, 1080 Ti. Each one has 11 gigabytes. And then basically the two of them are working in conjunction. And this is really the secret sauce that NVIDIA has given to the world that's enabled a lot of these advances to be possible. They've crafted an amazing set of platform that, whether it's running through the PCIe bus or through InfiniBand, they can actually make as long as it's homogeneous, all the different number of GPUs to orchestrate and behave as one giant GPU.
Right.
So I don't have to tell it assign X to this, Y to the different GPU. It just kind of does it, and
it's all doing it local on your machine. It's not going out to the internet.
No,
and
it's not.
Just for the sake of the audience, what is a GPU? Just generically.
It stands for a graphic process unit. But the biggest thing that you need to take away is that it is a dramatically different type of computing entity. Most computers run what's known as a CPU, central processing unit. And it's based on an architecture known as a von Neumann machine, where it's a common bus between the instruction and the data. And the big breakthrough that NVIDIA was able to do is not only use the dedicated bus for instruction and data, but to be able to isolate each unit of computation into, these cores. And, basically you can run the same number of calculations anywhere from 20 to 100 times faster, because you're shoveling a lot fewer pieces of information back and forth because you're not sharing the bus,
Right. So explain also what a GPT is, because Chat GBT is the words that are...
That's for generative pre-trained transform.
Right.
So we can guess generative, right? So here it's doing the thinking. So let's see what it's thinking.
Right. So the reason that... Oh, there you go. Okay. So I need help. What is it saying? Once.
In this user who's asking for a detailed summary about Jack Russo and law firm, blah, blah, blah. This is a chain of thought process that's not part of the final answer.
Okay. It's just giving you how it's reasoning through, right? Which is interesting in and of itself. I should decide to check any claims or cases mentioned to ensure accuracy. Okay, it's pretty amazing. Overview of Jack Russo and Computer Law Group. That's actually very similar to what ChatGPT did. It started with this overview point. The amazing thing is that this is all on how many gigabytes of data that actually got downloaded from DeepSeek?
The model is a 32 billion version of this.
So what's the size that you actually end up downloading?
20
gigabytes. 20 gigabytes. So you could do the same search on yourself, basically, right? You could do the same search on any other lawyer, right? It would be slightly different prompt, but basically the same. Give me an overview of who this person is.
I don't know if you saw it at the earlier on. It put a caveat on itself saying that my information is only up to date to July 2024. And what I'm trying to say is that with relatively, I don't want to say little, but with some moderate changes, we can add RAG as well as LoRa to incorporate all the things accomplishments you've been able to achieve since July of last year.
Right.
And it would be consistent with everything else. So I don't know how adequate or,
No, I think it's actually pretty close. I could send you what ChatGPT did with the same search. I think it's not identical, but it's similar. And for the security that you get, it's valuable because let's just pretend that you didn't want anyone to know that you were researching someone, right? You didn't want to say, did you ever put anything on the internet, search history or otherwise, because Google keeps track of all this stuff. There's no record. The record is on your machine. It's local to your machine. There's no outside record at all.
That's right.
It captured all that data. I mean, think about it just in terms of the value of that privacy. That's pretty valuable. And to me, I think it's accurate. I'd love for you to kind of copy and paste it and send it an email so I could see the whole chain. But conceptually, just in this little example that we did, in real time, we didn't pre-rehearse this. To me, it proves that having a local machine with something like DeepSeek on it without a connection to the internet is extremely valuable for basic research purposes. Because it's producing results that are in substance similar, if not identical. I'll double check that tonight after you send me the full text. And to me, it's like a statement that maybe there's actually a market for machines like the one you've reconstructed to be sold to various law firms so that they can have their associates do work without violating confidentiality or other risks of exposure of client data. I could tell you in the M&A field and the IPO field and, stuff that affects public markets, it's a big issue. It's a ginormous issue for those big law firms. It's like at least 200 or more of those big really more like 500 big law firms that have that problem of dealing with sensitive information that affects public markets. And obviously the government market would be huge because the government wants its knowledge workers to have this kind of availability. They wouldn't want to be buying it from a Chinese company, but just generally having this local expression of an AI tool that
they're referring to that as a sovereign AI.
Right.
That's the next big push that the CEO of NVIDIA, Jensen Huang's been pushing, that it won't be just a handful of hyperscalers, but as this becomes more, and just to further lend credence to what you said is, unlike using all the other access information that you have that's internal and private and not shared with anybody else, you can now feed that information to your own in-house, on-prem, air-gapped LLM in the form of some of the updating capabilities that we talked about, and you'll do even a much bang-up job than anything that OpenAI could do. And there's no way that you're going to share that information with public at large, but you have no problem working on your own little laboratory because it's your setup.
Right. You'd almost argue that from a trade secret program point of view, that most startups want to have their trade secrets kept secret and not be at risk of having them exposed and then having ex-employees say, hey, they're all out the door anyway, so no harm, no foul, is you'd almost want to say the startup is going to use an on-premises approach as a way to protect its silo of secrets. And that LLM itself becomes like the huge set of knowledge assets of the startup as it kind of grows everything around that LLM and everything that it does software-wise and everything that it does project planning-wise and so on. And I don't think at the moment most startup people have really focused on that, but there will be cases where the judges will say, sorry, you used a tool that released everything into the hands of others, so you're not going to have that secrecy. And I think what ties into all this is ultimately there'll be a lot more sensitivity to documents and how they're managed and how they're kept secure. And I think I said this to you in an email. Maybe the future is everyone's got an LLM that is their personal knowledge silo. And
I absolutely believe in that.
Right.
I think
and then that's
else,
goes with you. That goes with you as it goes with you even after you die. It basically is it's like basically your knowledge. It's like your ability to have an avatar then that can run off of that set of knowledge. And so your kids and grandkids and great grandkids can say, hey, I wonder what Grandpa Yon would say about this. And then they can probe it, and inferences would be drawn about what you would say about some new.
It's funny you say that. Some terminally ill patients have already kind of done this, where surviving family members have interacted with it and have commented. But just to further extend the paradigm you're talking about, I think not only is this recent technology advancement, AI, earth-shattering, but what it does is it just dramatically increases the attack surfaces in terms of security, right? Things that you used to reside in documents now can be regurgitated at will, and the ability to protect that in terms of what's important and what you don't want, willy-nilly shared, and the ability to kind of keep track of this information, I think will have a very important role to play.
Right.
And these documents will have to have some equivalent analogy to provenance. You got to be able to show, what are the source information, when was it created, how was it tracked,
So I know you're working on a startup. I know you're on stealth, and I know you're doing something really super interesting. So we'll wait until you do those announcements, but clearly your mindset is focused on the security issue, and that's still
absolutely that's what got me going.
Very hot topic, very hot topic, and I'm sure at some point we'll come back on and talk about what you're doing when the patents are all filed and the other stuff is done to protect to protect your stuff. But in general, I think the fact that you're focused on this is brilliant, because I can tell you the law firms are just worried, particularly the big law firms, the small ones too. And, everyone is like treating it as like no big deal now, but everyone knows there's going to be someone that gets tagged and made kind of a scapegoat. And they're going to look back and say, man, we should have gone with an on-premises approach. And it's so circular in a way, because remember, we went from everyone would have their own servers and everyone would have an on-site approach. And then it was all moved to the cloud. And then all that data that was in the cloud was taken advantage of for the generation of these AI systems. And now we're going back full circle to, well, maybe having something that's on premises.
No, but isn't that like a lot of things in life? You know, it's a pendulum, it keeps swinging.
Right.
And I think it's about to swing back away. And you see this in cloud in general as well, where you can't absolutely guarantee, because at the end of the day, as human beings, we're managing the system. So there are, solutions that are hybrid, where you have an on-prem for the most secure stuff.
Right.
And then things that you don't want to deal with, things like a disaster recovery or backup, you're willing to place on the cloud.
Right. Well, thanks, Yon. Actually, I should say Dr. Yon Chung. You're just so good at explaining this stuff and doing stuff in real time. No scripting, no nothing, just authentic. I love that. Give my regards to Min Hee and everyone else in your family. Take care, and I'll look forward to taking you out to lunch next time we can get together in person.
Sure. Please let me know when you come to California.
We'll do it. We'll do it. Absolutely. See you later. Okay. Bye-bye.
Tune in next time on The Valley Current.